You can't replace part of the brain. Like, you
treat them the same.
The source of truth for the MedTech industry.
Coexists with the province.
Robot understands things automatically.
Number one show in the MedTech industry.
So Stryker got ahead of that and changed in the 90s, built $1 billion company that held up high, a lot of things.
State of MedTech with your host, Omar and Khateeb. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show and our first robotics episode of the year. I love robotics, where I started my career, and so I love talking to people from the robotics space. Today's episode is with Greg Fischer, who has a really interesting background and kind of a rare one in terms of CEOs you find in the robotics space. So Greg spent his career developing innovative technologies for image-guided surgical interventions, is a pioneer, MRI-compatible surgical robotics, which are capable of utilizing real-time images from inside the body to guide precision robotic interventions. This is where it led him to become the founder of AiM Medical Robotics, AiM. You can learn more about them on their website, aimmedicalrobotics.com, which is a company that's leveraging technology from his team's research to revolutionize the neurosurgery experience. What's unique, very common that you see somebody who's a scientist, somebody who's a technical person founding a robotics company, but rare enough that they have the savvy to take over and kind of continue on as a CEO. Greg actually has taken over the helm as CEO of AiM time now, both on the fundraising capacity and the leadership side with AiM, which is really quite exciting. Before we come to the episode, I just want to give a quick few reminders. Number one is that if you're a startup founder, I know how difficult it is to get your name out, recognition and awareness around what you're doing. I want to invite you on to my podcast as an open invitation to any early stage founder, because I've decided that I really want to make sure that my podcast serves as a platform to help founders reach more audience, find investors, early adopters, and more. If you are one of those people, please shoot me a message on LinkedIn, send me an email. I'm going to be honest, I do get a lot of these, and so I'm doing my best to go through them all. And this is without sponsorship, by the way. I just want to be very clear about that. So if you're one of those early stage founders, please reach out. Let's see if we can get you on the show. Shout out to my partner, Alpha Sophia. Finding early adopters is really hard, and a lot of times you want to use data to guide your decisions, right? It's not enough just to look on podium and see who's presenting. You want to actually see who has the most procedural volume, who has the right connections and associations. Alpha Sophia is a partner that comes into play where, for one, they have a great database that's easy to use. Even you can give this to a sales rep, no offense to the sales, to use these things, because most databases are always difficult to use. Their company credo and mission is really focused on helping early stage startups find those adopters. Of course, larger companies use them as well. The last point that I like to share is that extremely affordable. Only $300 a month gives you access to their full database and their capacity, which I personally actually use with a lot of the clients that I help when it comes to commercialization. So if you want to learn more, get a free demo and 3 free searches on their platform. Give them a try. You just got to go to alphasophia.com/Omar to learn more. Finally, if you're an early stage founder of a MedTech company and you have not purchased your ticket to the LSI Emerging MedTech Summit in Dana Point this year, you're making a huge mistake. If there's one place that you need to make sure you go, it's the LSI Summit. It's one of my favorite events of the whole year. Amazing locations at the beautiful Monarch Resort, which is part of the Waldorf Astoria, right in Dana Point. It's a full week of just emerging medtech startups, venture capitalists, and strategic investors like J&J, Medtronic, and others who all attend this 1 week-long event. I go every year. I love it so much I take my family. Make sure that you reach out to them, get your ticket, and I'll see you there. So now let's get on to our episode with Greg Fischer, founder and CEO of AiM Robotics. Enjoy. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the show. And many of you know I got my career started in robotics. And as much as I love robots, unfortunately, the market is kind of saturated with them. And so I usually don't do too many robotic episodes, but this company caught my eye a long time ago. They're doing an amazing work. People who I respect a lot in the robotics industry have spoken highly of them, and that's AiM Medical Robotics. We're joined today by their founder and CEO, Greg Fischer. Greg, thank you so much for joining us. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me here, Omar.
Absolutely. So Greg, maybe before we talk shop and talk about the company, the market, and everything, I know that currently you guys are raising around. Maybe give the listeners a little background on you, because you have an interesting background, and I think it's worth highlighting.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot. Yeah, so I've really been through a whole bunch of different roles. For the last 15 years, I've been a faculty member at WPI, and prior to that, I did my PhD at Johns Hopkins as part of the Computer Integrated Surgery Research Center, which is really the epicenter of a lot of the robots that you're actually starting to see emerging on the market these days. So over the last 15 years, I've actually been the PI on a number of large grants through the NIH. So we've had funding from the National Cancer Institute, we have funding from the National Institute for Biomedical Imaging. We've had collaborations with a large number of other hospitals and academic centers, and it's really been an exciting 15 years in developing this technology, primarily related to using medical imaging, in particular MRI, to guide surgical interventions with the help of robots. And then as of February of this year, I took the role as CEO of AiM Medical Robotics, and then as of this fall, I've taken a leave of absence from the university, and I'm, full in, both feet here with the company, and I am super excited that this is really the time to take this technology that we've been shaking out over the last, let's say, 15 years, and really bring it to the market finally.
Fantastic. And hey, welcome to the startup world. It's always exciting to see people take the full leap. And, I know nothing else. So like, it's very exciting, especially for somebody who like yourself is a researcher, but has what it takes to make it in this world. I think it's great. And I'm a big believer in like founder led companies, especially earlier on, because nobody understands the vision better than you. And so I want to read from your website here. And I want you to kind of expand on that. So on your website, you say that AiM Medical Robotics is a neurosurgical robotics company that is working to bring high levels of precision, automation, and efficiency to the complex environment of neurosurgery. And that you developed a portable MRI-compatible surgical robot for the use in the MRI suite and the operating room. And your mission is to improve outcomes for patients undergoing neurosurgery for functional brain disorders. So that's Parkinson's, epilepsy, etc., and cancer, while providing cost savings to hospitals by eliminating errors and reducing procedure time up to 50%. The title of that intro was called We Think in Real Time. So what's the vision of AiM?
Oh, sure. Actually, that's a great intro there. So the idea here is that we want to have real time, and real time means different things to different people, but let's call it intraoperative, meaningful, interactive medical imaging during surgical procedures. So as you're doing a surgical procedure, often you'll have high resolution preoperative imaging. You'll go in, or the surgeon will go in and spend a tremendous amount of time identifying exactly what they want to do, how they want this procedure to go. By the time you get to the operating room, and this may be hours, days, weeks, months after that initial imaging was done, the person is not necessarily in the same orientation, or they might have different anatomy, or there might have been changes. And then once you start that procedure, for example, neurosurgery, and have drilled, let's say, a burr hole in the brain, you can have leakage of cerebral spinal fluid, you can have air getting in. The brain is a very soft organ, and it's going to swell just like any other tissue in your body. So these targets that you're trying to hit and the obstacles that you're trying to avoid, they're no longer in the same spot anymore. So we feel it is incredibly important to get real-time or interactive or updated imaging during these procedures, so that you can actually update the surgical plan, that you can use it to track the instruments that you're trying to deliver this therapy with, and really guarantee that you actually hit the targets and follow these safe trajectories and hit that exact target that you intended to hit.
Got it. Yeah. And, for me, I worked at Mazor Robotics in the early days, and DBS was one of the applications, but, what really got Mazor acquired was its spine applications. And so I feel like for the world of neurosurgery, robotics is a great use case. It just hasn't gotten the attention that it's needed. And so, right now, when it comes to the market of, let's say, robotic neurosurgery, like what else is out there that I don't want to say can be compared to you guys, but, especially in the world of venture capital investors, there are other robotic systems for neurosurgery. What makes you guys any different?
So I think the large majority of systems that are out there, pretty much every robot that's out there, is based on preoperative medical imaging, right? So you're taking these preoperative images, and then you do a registration to the person, usually on rigid anatomy or rigid landmarks. So
Yeah.
you'll either scrape across the skull, and we'll try to do some sort of registration based on the person's anatomy, or you'll touch fiducial marks that are on somebody, or maybe you'll have screws that are screwed into the head. These are all relative to the cranium. And if you're doing surgery in, let's say, orthopedics or rigid anatomy, that actually works amazingly well, because you can track relative to the targets
The
exactly where
bone's
you
not
are,
moving,
right?
but
But if
you're
you're trying to attack internal anatomy, so let's say the brain, which is moving around inside your head, this can also apply to abdominal tissues or the prostate or breast operations, right? All these different types of procedures, the soft tissue is moving. And what that means is if you were, for example, tracking with a navigation system relative to the head, relative to the skull, right, the actual brain tissue and the targets within the brain and those safe trajectories relative to the brain, they can move during the course of that procedure. They can move after you, for example, drill the burr hole, but also if you're doing something like deep brain stimulation, they're typically bilateral, which means they repeat this procedure twice. So not only do you get some shift from the first one, you'll actually get additional shift as you're doing that first procedure that will move, for example, the target and all the other anatomy for that second insertion. And other procedures like stereo EEG, where you're putting substantially more electrodes, maybe 12 to 14 electrodes, that's really just going to get amplified. So there's a huge advantage to figuring out how can we use real-time imaging. And the problem with some of the imaging systems that are out there now that are integrated with robots, so if you look at an O-arm or using a cone beam CT or an intraoperative CT scanner, they are really great at finding, again, the bony anatomy. So they can be used for that registration step. Maybe they can replace that step of using an optical tracker for the registration, or maybe they can use for verifying the target relative to the bony anatomy, but they're not going to see the soft tissue very well. So you really want MRI, and every surgeon that I'm aware of that's planning a neurosurgery procedure, they're going to use preoperative MRI. I don't think there's any debate that that's really the best imaging modality to use. The problem is there's substantial challenges to using that intraoperatively. So our goal is, can we use the medical imaging modality that they're all using for surgical planning, they all appreciate, and can we actually bring that to them during the surgical procedure so they can actually watch changes and update that plan as it goes along?
Yeah, and I think that's important to mention. I mean, I think for other organ systems in the body, I know that like Quantum Surgical has a robotic system for the liver. You can be a few millimeters or centimeters off, more or less, and you're okay because it's the liver, right? But the brain is the one part of the body where, like, in terms of tissue, like you can't you can't be off. And again, like with the problem with the current systems is that it's preoperative, so it's happening in the past, and then like you're using bony anatomy, which is fine, except that the organ structure you're dealing with is soft tissue and it's going to move, so that just leads, I mean, at least in intraoperatively, you're just doing a lot more registration and everything, so it's probably a lot better than the standard, which is freehand. The problem though is that when you're having to re-register everything, it just takes more time, right?
Well, it takes more time, but also you might not even be able to do that re-registration in some cases because you don't really know where the internal tissue went. So, maybe in some sort of radiation therapy treatments, they'll implant, let's say, a gold particle or some other types of markers that are visible in X-ray, and you can use that to track the target. And that's how some of these robotic systems will, for example, track targets within organs. But if we, for example, have a boundary of a brain tumor that we want to know where that boundary is as you're doing a surgical procedure, possibly at the exact same time as we're trying to monitor thermal dose delivery of, let's say, an ablation therapy, there's really no other good way to find where that is other than having real-time soft tissue imaging. And I'd say MRI is really the best way to do that. We're also looking into ways potentially to use ultrasound or fusing ultrasound with MRI in some cases to get at least close to that capability, possibly in the operating room. But really, you need to have soft tissue imaging that can identify, where you are relative to the tissue and where that target is. And for, let's say, deep brain stimulation, we want to find that target, or at least find soft tissue anatomy around that target that lets us estimate where that target has moved to. And then for brain tumors, it's finding the target, but also MRI enables real-time thermometry, meaning we can get real-time thermal dose maps. So as the robot is aligning this instrument and delivering, for example, a directional heat-based therapy, we could actually, for example, rotate that therapy or insert and retract it while we're getting live dose maps and while we're tracking in real time the boundary of that tumor. So you have this ability to have essentially closed loop control, putting in engineering terms, to track the actual trajectory and guarantee you burn the tissue you want. And getting back to your point before, if you were doing this in, let's say, the liver or possibly in breast cancer applications, it's okay to overablate, right? That would be pretty typical, which would be just take some extra margins, right? In the brain, you have to be really, really careful because if you take too much tissue, there can be really tremendous side effects. And if you take too little, you're going to have serious issues with recurrence. So you really got to nail that perfectly. And that's why it's so important. And that's why our target initial application is for neurosurgery procedures in general, and specifically functional procedures like deep brain stimulation, and then also oncology applications such as needle-based ultrasound delivery, high-energy ultrasound.
When you say, yeah, and I was going to ask, when you mentioned like needle-based, like ultrasound based surgery, the first company that comes to mind is like InsightTech. In a case like this, would InsightTech technically be a competitor to you guys, complement to the technology? Neither?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I really like the fact that they have this ability to take real-time MR imaging. So in that regard, they dead on in that regard that they understand the need for having real-time imaging. There are concerns about being able to get the size and the shape of, for example, an ablation region that you want to get using something like InsightTech. And my understanding is they focused a lot more on functional issues now, including things like epilepsy, for example,
Yes.
or tremor, because that's very well suited, for example, the size of the ablation regions that they're trying to look for. I know when it comes to oncology, one of the concerns that I've heard voiced is that it's really important to get concurrent biopsies, meaning they want to take tissue samples at exactly the same spot they're delivering therapy, because they use that for planning the adjunct therapy, figuring out, does this person need radiation therapy? Does this person need chemotherapy? If so, which chemotherapy is going to work best for them? And in order to do that, you really need to be able to take a tissue sample with, for example, a biopsy needle. Our ablation devices are essentially the exact same form factor as a biopsy needle. So you can use the device, go in, take a biopsy on that exact same trajectory, stick the device in and perform an ablation. So there's some real advantages in the oncology space in particular where you really want to do that. And then on the deep brain stimulation or stereo EEG, for example, in some cases you want to be getting measurements. And I think there's advantages to using electrodes potentially over ablation because it has the ability to be reversible and adjustable. So it can help refractory patients. But again, that's really a clinical decision the clinicians need to make. And for the right patient and for the right needs, essentially, there's a lot of different treatment options out there.
Got it. Got it. Right now, like when it comes to the market, like how big is the market for your product? Because the one thing that comes to mind, at least from my standpoint for neurosurgery, is like not every hospital has a neurosurgery program, right? So it's kind of good that you have a smaller market, but you know exactly who those markets are. What's the market size look like for this?
Yeah, so I think you kind of done two different things there. So the first thing I wanted to bring up is that our device is able to work both in an operating room and in an MRI suite. So we're not restricted necessarily only to being able to work in high-end interventional systems. There are some hospitals that have really amazing interventional MRI suites for doing neurosurgery procedures. Those are obviously ideal places that we would love to work, but we can work in pretty much any traditional diagnostic MR. So this does not need to be a specialized neurosurgery center. In fact, we could go pretty much any 3 Tesla, even 1.5 Tesla, possibly a lot of these new and emerging lower field or midfield scanners, right? So there's a huge opportunity to be working in all of these different scanners. We don't require the need for building our robot into a MRI scanner room, for example. There's absolutely no customization. You could take this out of the closet or bring it on the transport case from the plane, set it up in any MRI scanner. It takes about a half hour or less to get set up. So there's no need to customize it. We can use it anywhere. We can put it into any operating room. In that case, you don't get the real-time imaging, but you still have the advantages of the workflow of using a robot. So in that regard, I think there's some of this, I know it's a bit of a buzzword now, but democratizing surgery, in that you don't necessarily need to be doing neurosurgery in these absolutely top-notch centers that have these very, very expensive interventional MRI suites. It really opens up the door to do these procedures elsewhere. So that's one aspect of it. The other part is, getting to the market. We're initially targeting for our beachhead market is deep brain stimulation for Parkinson's disease. My understanding is there's about 120,000 patients a year that would really be eligible, and probably only about 10% of the patients that are actually eligible go for it now, in part because it's a very long, all-day procedure. Patients are awake. It's a really traumatic procedure in that, essentially you have the patient laying there. They have to be asking them questions or moving their hands or tuning it and tweaking it during the procedure, listening to microelectrodes, making sure you're in the right spot. If we can do this inside the MRI, we can actually use the real-time or the intraoperative MRI to guarantee that you actually put these electrodes in exactly the right spot. And in that scenario, we could take this procedure that was an all-day procedure, knock it down to, let's say about 2 hours. Now you could be doing 2 to 3 procedures a day when you could have been doing 1 procedure a day. So it's faster, it's going to be safer because you can guarantee that you're on the right trajectories, right? You find out intraoperatively if you're in the right spot, so you don't have to wait until after you've closed up the patient, wheeled them to the MRI, take an image, find out you're not in the right spot, or after you've tried to program it, find out you're not in the right spot, and then have to go back and do a reoperation, which happens in a surprisingly large number of times. I've seen it reported as high as 20, even 30% in some journals. So if we can avoid that need for reoperations, it's going to be much more appealing. So now you could get 10 times the people that are doing Parkinson's, DBS procedures now being eligible. Also dystonia, essential tremor, medication-resistant epilepsy, severe OCD. All of these are FDA-approved indications for deep brain stimulation that we could target, on day one. And then there's also a large number of procedures that are, I call them new and emerging. There's a lot of clinical studies that are out there This can include addictions, anxieties, Alzheimer's, chronic and severe pain, medication-resistant depression, headaches, potentially Tourette's, Huntington's, eating disorders, schizophrenia. There's studies out there for all of these, right? So some of these are actually going to be really good candidates for deep brain stimulation, which is going to further enhance that market. So, we start with Parkinson's and then all the other FDA-approved treatments, and then from there we can expand. And as I mentioned, we can also start working at the oncology applications using both commercially available applicators like the lit probes that are available from Medtronic and other companies, and then we also have in the works some of our own approaches for doing ablation.
Fantastic. And you mentioned also, because most hospitals don't have a portable MI, so that allows you to kind of move into the ASC realm. If somebody was using this in an ASC setting, or maybe not an ASC, but essentially not using the portable MRI, you mentioned workflows. If you didn't use the portable MRI within the operation, how else could the device be used?
Well, not so much portable MRI, but if not using the portable robot within the MRI, right? So our robot is this very compact device that we can set it up in any MRI scanner. I would say the majority of use cases are going to be traditional diagnostic MRs that have been set up in such a way that they can be used for procedures, which means essentially they need to make sure the ventilation and whatnot is correct. And that's actually done quite regularly now for lit procedures and a whole host of other ones. So that's not really a new leap for a lot of hospitals. But again, we can also work in these interventional suites. And then where I think there's a huge opportunity is a number of companies now are coming out with lower field, and I'm not talking about the ultra low fields, but let's say half Tesla scanners that can actually be turned on and off and put into operating rooms. And to me, that's a huge opportunity for us. And then some of them have tricks now that give really good thermometry, meaning we can get temperature maps again for these oncology applications. So putting MRIs inside the operating room is with some of these lower cost, lower field scanners, I think there's a tremendous opportunity in the future. That's not today, right? There's a lot of time before I think we have that really take the market. But I think in the next several years, we're going to see a lot more of these lower field scanners showing up in more traditional operating room suites. But just in the OR on its own, there is a tremendous advantage, because if you go on your surgical navigation system, you do all this planning, it's typically going to spit out numbers that you dial into a manual stereotactic frame. As much as we talk about robots, the majority of these procedures are still done with a big metal frame that's bolted onto your head. And typically it spits out 5 numbers, your XYZ numbers, then 2 arc angles. You dial these in with essentially sterile screwdrivers, get it in the right spot. A lot of times that's yelling the numbers across the room or writing them on a piece of paper or putting them on a whiteboard. And then multiple times during the procedure, you need to move it out of the way to get access. You move it back again. You move it out of the way, you get back again. You have to go to target 1. You have to go to target 2. There's a lot of opportunities for human error and problems and issues in there, plus just the convenience. So one of the things ways I like to think about a robot is an actuated stereotactic frame. So you can probably see behind me, it really looks more like a traditional frame. And the idea behind this is that we can essentially dial in these arc angles. The robot can just align to it. We have a head clamp that's built right in there. So it just takes that whole procedure and makes it much simpler. It automates that task of taking these numbers out of your surgical planning software and making the robot go to that position. So you can simply do your plan, click a button, it aligns. You can optionally have an optical tracking system on there confirming that you're in the right spot, and then use that to check it if we want. We can use intraoperative X-ray. We can use intraoperative cone beam CT. We could use intraoperative O-arms. And one of the cool advantages of creating an MRI-compatible robot made of plastic is it actually also happens to be radiolucent. So last time we tested this in our cadaver studies a couple weeks ago, we actually were able to get beautiful cone beam CT images right through the robot as it was tracking or as it was holding a deep brain stimulation delivery cannula. So we can actually use it for confirmation. Again, it's relative to the skull, not relative to the soft tissue with the X-ray, but it at least gets us at least to that point of what's done in the standard of care in a much more convenient, streamlined way.
Yeah, no. And by the way, just for the people who are listening, I mean, I'll tell people if they're interested, they can go to aimmedicalrobotics.com. But could you just kind of describe what the robot looks like? Because I know a lot of people who are listening, the first thing they think of when they think of a robot is either a Da Vinci system or like what you see in the robotic spine world, which is like a robot cart with an arm or two sticking out of it. So can you describe your robot? Because it's actually very, it's different than what's out there.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. So when I think of robots, most people are going to think of something more like a Da Vinci-like robot where you're doing dexterous manipulations, right? You're going to have some sort of surgeon console. You'll have one, two, three, four different arms on the robot arm, right? The other side of that you see on a lot of image-guided surgical systems is a cart of some sort with an arm of some sort, usually an optical tracking system, tracking that arm and tracking the patient, and you do the alignment. So you have this relatively large cart sitting in the room. We have a very, very different form factor. It's actually this arch-like robot that's just a little bit wider than a person, and we put a platform that lays under their head. The platform is probably about maybe 1 foot by about 2 feet, and it can actually sit right on top of the MRI scanner bed. The patient lays on that. There's a head clamp built into it, so we can just lock the patient's head right into that base clamp. And then once they're in place, once we've set up the sterile field, we can take this arch, and it really does look like just a C pointing down, drop it right on top of the patient, and that robot has 4 degrees of freedom on it. It's already inside of a sterile drape, and then we can clip an end effector onto it. These are going to be sterile single-use end effectors that can hold whatever instrument it is that you want. So if you want a holder for a deep brain stimulation electrode, if you want holders for ablation instruments, they can just clip right on the front of this. And then the robot essentially aligns the 4 degree of freedom alignment, which is very similar to what a lot of the other robotic alignment guides do, but that are doing it with big cart-like robots in the operating room. We can do this right inside the bore of a traditional 60 centimeter or 70 centimeter MR scanner. We can do the alignment, we can confirm the alignment, and then the software can actually spit out essentially the depth. You set the depth stop and insert it into the right depth. Another option is you can actually insert it partially, and we've done this test as well. Take an image, confirm how much additional distance you need to go, and then go in a little further. Then you can really guarantee and dial in that depth without any chance of going too far into the brain tissue, for example. So it's a very, very compact device. It's very easy to set up. I actually just have a wheeled Pelican, transport case. I can bring this in. We've flown, around the country showing this to our clinical advisors. We've brought it out to other, surgeons and hospitals in the area as well. So it's a very portable system. We can just set it up anywhere. There's a portable control box that goes in the corner of the MRI room, and this is really unique for what we're doing versus what a lot of the other groups trying to do work in MRI is. We don't require, again, anything customized in the room. Everything is self-contained in that control box. There's one cable that goes from that control box to the robot, and then there's a fiber optic cable that passes from there to the control computer, essentially just a laptop sitting next to the console outside the MRI scanner room. So every MRI scanner I've ever seen has a waveguide. They usually use it for passing in either fiber optics or fluids, for patient care monitoring and things like that. So it's really, really straightforward to set this up anywhere. And again, this kind of compact approach of MRI compatible robot controller that's small robot itself connected to each other inside the room, and then small fiber passing out lets us go pretty much anywhere we want to use this thing.
So, and it seems like, again, like the one of the issues that happen when it comes to new MedTech technology, even if it makes things better, is that often complicates existing workflows. It seems like you guys did a good job designing something that just fits into an existing workflow. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's why I like to think of this more as a actuated stereotactic frame than a robot. As much as I love saying robots and robots are awesome, right? We all love robots, but really think of a stereotactic frame, which again has these arc angles. It just aligns these angles. It's a very, very compact device. And we can use that in the same way that it's typically done in a traditional procedure. So you get your surgical planning images. Out of that, you create a surgical plan. It gives you the essentially orientation that you want of this instrument. The robot can align to that. We can use that, for example, to mark a burr hole. We can drill the burr hole. If we're doing this in the MRI, we can then actually take another set of images. After I've taken that set of images, I can find my target again. I can find that burr hole. If necessary, I can actually update that trajectory plan, again, to take into account swelling, cerebral spinal fluid loss, air getting in, any other factors that are going to affect the shape of the brain. And then once we've done that, the robot, again, can automatically realign as necessary, but it's really following that same workflow. Then we can insert the instrument, and then we track it again. So it's really almost an identical procedure of what you would do with a stereotactic frame, except we've been able to do this inside the MRI scanner. So we can essentially update that plan with new images as we're going along, and then it updates the numbers that would be spit out to the frame, and then the frame automatically makes those tweaks or changes as we're going along. So we put a lot of work into really trying to mimic the traditional workflow as much as possible.
So that being said, so what stage are you guys currently at, and what are some of the milestones that you've hit so far in terms of like your product development, your clinical trials, and market validation?
Yeah, absolutely. So, this is interesting because, as I mentioned before, I have my academic background on this before we jumped in with the company. So we have close to 15 years and probably about $15 million of NIH funding that's gone into what I would say shaking out the ability to take robots, put them inside MRI scanners, and be able to get really good quality imaging and precision motion. So, as much as the company is only a few years old, we've actually been working on this technology for quite a while. So, under all the previous development, we've really nailed down like how can we actually take robots and put them in the scanner and do what we want to do with them and still get really, really good image quality. Since the company's been founded, we've been really focused on the commercial development and identifying, what is the real user needs? What are the requirements? What's this workflow that we want to follow? What are the specifications that we need for this particular embodiment of the device? So we've worked on two different commercial prototypes. So you may have seen some pictures of our early commercial prototype. We actually just recently, in August, finished our second commercial prototype that we're calling the beta prototype. We got it up and running, and we actually ran our first preclinical trials last day of August. So it's really, really exciting. We've been making a tremendous amount of progress lately that we've actually been able to demonstrate our latest commercial prototype and to work our way through preclinical trials in two different scenarios. What was very nice about this was, one, we tested this inside the MRI suite, and we did a deep brain stimulation procedure in a cadaver 100% inside the MRI suite, meaning we were able to take preoperative imaging, do the planning on those preoperative images. We could have also brought in and registered preoperative images that were done elsewhere. We used that to identify a burr hole. The robot aligned that pointer to that burr hole. We opened the skin flap. The robot aligned a drill. The robot acted as a robotic drill guide. We drilled that hole. We shuttled the patient back into the MRI. We took a new set of images. As necessary, we were able to tweak the plan slightly, adjust that plan. The robot can align the instrument, and then once we've aligned that instrument, we're able to push it in along that trajectory and then take confirmation images to see where it is. So we were able to demonstrate the feasibility of that workflow 100% inside the scanner. If you were to do it for a real deep brain stimulation procedure, you typically would do that bilateral. So you would have replaced a second procedure, or you would have put a second electrode in. And that's where there's this big advantage of having what I would consider a bed-mounted arc-like robot, because it makes it very easy to do a second electrode. If this was for stereo EEG, we could have done third, fourth, fifth, and all the way up to however many electrodes you want to do, because it's very, very easy to do multiple targets with this setup. And then the other thing that we did was we demonstrated a completely operating room-based procedure, because look, as much as I would love to see this go into MRI, we're not naive. The majority of these procedures are still done in operating rooms, and we're going to have to cater to that. And I think there's going to be a time period where a lot of these procedures are done with our robot in the operating room before we really can transition into the MRI suite. So in there, we demonstrated completely within the operating room, again, using the surgical navigation software to identify targets. We used an optical tracking system to register the patient. We use an optical tracking system to identify where the robot is relative to the patient. And then same thing, we press a button, robot can align to the trajectory we want. Robot can be used to mark the burr hole. Robot can be used to insert the instrument. Once the instrument is in, we were able to take both fluoroscopy images and cone beam CT images to confirm it's in the right spot. So we were able to really push our way through both of those, which for us was a major milestone. And to me, it was really, really rewarding to see that, look, this workflow actually is viable and this is going to work. And now we're driving towards getting ready for first in human trials that we're anticipating, first into second quarter of next year.
That's very exciting. And those human trials, you're going to be doing them. You said FDA. That's going to be done here in the U.S.
Yeah, yes, that's actually an interesting point that we want to touch on. So we have really good collaborations with a number of the local academic centers here, and what we've done in the past is been able.
Are you able to mention who those collaborations are? I mean, if you want to keep them private, you're welcome to. Just I always have to ask.
Yeah, well, so we have some top hospitals in the Boston area that we've been working really, really closely with, and we've really built rapport with over the last.
That'll be enough to give them
the last several years, and you can take a guess as to where. But under those, we're able to work with the IRBs, because some of the hospitals around here are very progressive. And if you can really convince the IRB that this is a truly non-significant risk device, we can actually get this into human trials a little bit faster. And the main reason we want to do that is we really want to get this feedback. We want to get clinicians in there. We want to really understand this workflow, understand the ins and outs of it, put ourselves in the feet of the surgeons, and find out what, if anything, we need to do to really optimize this system. I'm very confident it's going to work, very confident it's going to get us the accuracy we need. And this study is going to let us really just optimize this whole process and workflow to make it as streamlined as possible. So working our way through this, one of the advantages of using this robotic stereotactic frame approach is we can put the robot into the aligned position. We can take a set of images, make sure it's in the right spot. Once we confirmed we're in the right spot, we can lock the robot in place. In fact, piezoelectric motors are inherently brakes when they're not powered. So it's very straightforward to essentially take this robot, put it in place, use secondary confirmation with imaging fiducials. So we'll actually have little bright spots on the robot that can confirm we're in the right spot. And that's going to let us run these trials and really, really demonstrate that this works in human trials. It'll let us demonstrate the workflow is right, the timing is right, and in particular, the accuracy, because that's so, so important for this procedure, is that we really want to demonstrate that, look, we can actually get this to what I would anticipate is essentially the resolution of the MR images, because we can track it and make sure we're in the right spot intraoperatively.
Nice, nice. In this process, I was going to ask. I know that you guys are going through your first in human trials and everything, but assuming that everything goes well, around what date are you aiming for, like, commercial launch?
Yeah, that's a really good question as well. So we're in parallel with this first in human trial, assuming everything goes according to plan with our fundraising efforts. We're going to be in parallel doing our commercial prototype development, really nailing down formally all of the requirements, getting the device under all the appropriate design controls, getting our initial manufacturing run put together. We would anticipate doing all of our V&V testing towards the end of 2024 and into early 2025. And that's when we're looking to get our 510K application in. So assuming everything goes according to plan, I'd say Q1, Q2 of 2025, we'll be getting this device into FDA approvals. I would say very shortly thereafter, we'll look to do a soft launch. So probably send a few of these units out to our friendly academic sites that we're working with, really just shake everything out. And then have a full commercial launch, probably end of 2025 into 26.
Got it. So in that process, when you guys have, fully launched, what's the business model and monetization strategy for this?
Okay, sure. So there's going to be an upfront cost for the robot. I think relative to a lot of the robots in the market, I think we can have a very reasonable cost structure in there. But there'll be the pricing for the robot itself. We're going to have the service contracts that go along with that, and then there's going to be a per procedure cost. The consumables will probably be in the ballpark of about 2,000 or so per procedure. We'll have to see, obviously, exactly where that shakes out. But that's
How does
really
that
where I think a
compare
lot
with?
of the revenue is going to start coming from.
How does that compare to, like, the procedure today? Is that something standard that they're used to? I mean, aside from the robotic system, but, like, is that standard and in line with what's expected for these kind of procedures?
Yeah, in this case, essentially what we need to provide is, sterile drapes that are going to be customized for the system, adapter sleeves, and, essentially these single-use end effectors or end effector adapters for the robotic platform. So, that's in the ballpark of something that's very reasonable. There's some other devices that are out there that have very, very high, single-use costs, and I think that's a deterrent for some of their usage. So I do think there's a huge opportunity, especially in these neuro procedures, to have a reasonable opportunity to have per procedure costs, but not ones that are through the roof. So I think by doing that, I could anticipate seeing these robots used a couple times a day, which really should be, a very, very good market for us.
Got it. That makes sense. One of the things that's kind of interesting is, like, when it comes to robotics. I mean, I want to touch on this in a second. Your robot is a platform technology, but can you kind of expand a little bit on that, and then also, like, you don't have to call anybody out by name. By all means, if you want to, you can. But, of course, I see some opportunities for, like, collaboration with some of the larger industry players for this. But yeah, it kind of, explain how this is a platform technology. Let's maybe start there.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, we've really worked very hard to develop enabling technologies for putting sensors, actuators, control systems inside the MRI scanner. So we focused heavily on piezoelectric actuation systems. We've been working on essentially semi-custom ways of doing the actuation, unique ways of doing the mechanism designs to give us the rigidity we need with the materials that are compatible, developing all of the control electronics in a way that are compatible and allow us to be able to operate these motors inside the MRI scanner without affecting image quality, for example. So all of these technologies are really broad in terms of their potential clinical applications. And in fact, in the R&D setting, we've actually created a robotic system that can be used for prostate biopsies under a live MRI, for example. And that potentially can be a further target for what we're going to commercialize at AiM Medical Robotics. all of the IP that we've developed related to MRI-guided surgical robotics under the academic settings been exclusively licensed into the company. So AiM has complete control over that. And the idea here behind this is that we can create this platform and we can use this, first for neurosurgery, in particular, first for deep brain stimulation. We also have other end effectors on the horizon that start adding additional degrees of freedom to the neurosurgery robot. We can see this being used for abdominal soft tissue. So you could think kidney, liver, pancreas, for example. We can be doing, for example, prostate applications or gynecological applications. And I do see some advantages for neck and spine applications as well.
How can, why would it be used in soft tissue like abdominal surgery, like gen surgery and everything? Like what would the platform provide that like in a Da Vinci system or anything comparable can't provide today?
So I would really compare us more to other image-guided surgical systems versus the dexterous soft tissue surgery systems.
I see.
So if anything, can be compared more to devices that are taking needle-based instruments, whether it's an optical tracking system-based device or robotic device, and navigating that instrument to the right target. So we can be using this, for example, for liver ablations or liver biopsies, for example. And
so like either delivering therapy. Like delivering therapy or let's say doing a biopsy, one or the other.
Yeah.
So something that's not like not a surgery that needs general anesthesia is
Yeah, I mean, they might still use general anesthesia in some cases.
Yeah,
so
like
when we're doing the neurosurgery procedures, they'll be asleep, but there might be other cases. So for example, in the prostate application, they may not always be asleep. In fact, I believe in a lot of these cases, they'll actually be under local anesthesia and be pretty much out of it, if you will, but they're not really feeling the pain, but they're not asleep and they're not completely under general anesthesia. So yeah, I think it really opens up the door to what I would call percutaneous operations inside the MRI scanner using the robotic platform. And we have some different variants of the manipulator itself, but they all use the same core technology. They use the same sensors, same actuators, same wiring, same control systems, same electronics for driving these motors, the majority of the same communication software, the majority of the same navigation software. So it's pretty straightforward for us, down the road. And again, we're hyper-focused on neuro. We really don't want to take our eyes off that till we get our first product launched. But after that point, we are very, very interested in pursuing other, clinical applications. The other area where I see a huge opportunity is in pediatrics, because in the pediatric scenario, you really don't want to be using X-ray guidance. In fact, MRI-guided interventions have really become a lot more popular in this. And when I was recently at a neurosurgery convention, that was one of the biggest interests that I'd heard in our robot was using this for pediatrics. So I think pretty much any sort of application there, not just neuro applications, but really all over the body, there's a huge advantage to being able to use needle-based interventions pretty much anywhere in the body with live MR guidance.
Got it. Now, to date, how much have you guys raised total?
So we've brought in previously a $3.4 million seed round. Since that time, we've brought in about $1.25 million towards our next round, and we're in the process of raising a $5 million Series A round that we're looking to close out this year.
Got it. So your current fundraising goal is the $5 million Series A.
Absolutely, yeah. We're looking to raise this $5 million round, and that's going to get us through these first-in-human trials, and then well underway towards the clinical prototype development efforts.
Got it. Can you explain more about the clinical prototype development?
Yeah, absolutely. So this gets back to what I'd mentioned before, is that we really want to be nailing down our final clinical device development in parallel with these first-in-human trials, using this to really do our human factors assessment, get as much feedback as we can. Because you mentioned this earlier, one of the key distinguishing factors from what we're doing is, it's going to look and feel and operate a lot like the traditional procedure that these neurosurgeons are comfortable with, and we just need to nail that workflow down. So part of this is going to be developing that, and then under the early next year into kind of middle of next year, all of our design development is going to be under appropriate design controls. I would anticipate by middle toward end of next year, we'll be doing our first development run or manufacturing runs and using those for our V&V testing, which likely is going to start happening, probably toward the end of next calendar year, assuming everything goes as we anticipate.
Got it. Yeah. And the last thing I wanted to make sure to cover, I usually ask it earlier on, but the technology is like really fascinating to me. And so we kind of dove right into it. But can you talk a little bit about the team? I mean, you have an interesting team put together there, including like your board and advisors. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way our company got founded was actually quite interesting. That it was myself and a neurosurgeon who at the time was at UMass Medical School. We started collaborating, and again, this was back about 15 years ago. We really saw an immediate need for using live imaging to help functional neurosurgery, and that's where we started working on like how can we develop this. And we actually, under my academic life, had multiple PhD students have been developing all sorts of cool techniques. Our first publication on an MRI compatible neurosurgery robot was, I think it was probably 2009 or so. So we've really been at this for a while. And then myself, my co-founder, Dr. Julie Politzis, and then we had a banker that was also working with us. His name's Craig Pearson. The three of us got together and founded the company. And then after that, we founded the company. We started in by bringing in an outside CEO that had a tremendous amount of experience in the medical device sales. So Bob Cathcart actually led our company for the first few years. He was with Hansen Medical, for example, and a bunch of other companies along the way. So, I really couldn't think of a better person to really develop the sales and the marketing strategy and really understand where we're going with this company. And then since then, we brought on board Jonathan Sakier, who has been really guiding a lot of our clinical development and the business development and just really pointing us in the right direction. He was one of the original founders of Computer Motion that eventually merged into Intuitive Surgical. So, he's been in the surgical robotics space as long as there has been a surgical robotics space. And then we have a really large cadre of clinical advisors that have been incredibly helpful in pointing us in the right direction. And then on the business side, one of our investors is Samantha Surrey from Surrey Capital, who's one of our board members. She has a tremendous amount of experience of just the whole medical device industry and how to partner in co-development deals and working with other companies, as well as a host of other folks that have been really, really instrumental in driving this forward. So, it's been a really amazing effort, and I can't really mention everybody by name. I think we'll go on forever here, so I apologize for anyone that we're not mentioning specifically. But we've really put together an amazing team here to develop out this technology. And as we move forward, we're hiring both folks that have tremendous amount of experience in MRI guided surgical robotics. In fact, we have two of my previous PhD students that have been involved in this as well. We've also brought in folks that have a tremendous amount of industry experience. So the prototype system that we developed, we actually had three folks that had pretty much a career of developing industrial robotics working with us to really make sure that we design this right and get the accuracy that we need because, unfortunately, being in the MR, we can't just use off-the-shelf surgical robots. So if we're doing this in the OR, you can actually shortcut that. And there's companies out there that will sell you industrial robots that you can build your system around. We really needed to develop that ourselves because that's our core competency. So, we've really built what I would consider an amazing team around this. And, once we get this funding, and I'm actually looking to expand that substantially.
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned that again. No knock on any other existing robotics company, but that I think that especially in the orthopedic world, you got used to seeing, a company coming out and they're improving on some small little area that's an incremental improvement on a procedure that a bunch of people are already in, and so that's why AiM really stood out to me because it's really it's really transformative. It's very different from what you're used to seeing. And what I like is that you guys have a very well-defined beachhead and market being like functional neurosurgery and DBS, but then some plans to kind of expand beyond that. It's a very interesting technology, and especially the fact that it fits within the current workflow, and it's a small robot. So it's like it's a half arc that just fits within the MRI machine on the table. And so those kind of things I think are really important. I think they're not they're often, I don't want to say overlooked, but people don't appreciate the importance of like developing technology that dovetails into an existing workflow, because if it doesn't, even no matter how great it is, it's hard to get clinical adoption for it.
Sure, absolutely. No, I think that's really what's driving this for us. And actually, one of our advisors came up with I thought this was a cute way to put it, but essentially he said it's a game changer without changing the game, which I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's actually a really nice way to frame this because we want to bring all sorts of amazing new changes to the way this is done and make this a much more streamlined workflow, increase the accuracy, be able to do it faster, make it safer, reduce the chance of revisions. But at the same time, we want it to kind of look and feel in a workflow that's very familiar to surgeons in the way they're doing it now. So I thought that was really, really important. And part of this is just giving tools to the neurosurgeons. We're not trying to automate this procedure and, take away the jobs of the neurosurgeons and get them out of the loop, right? I would almost think of this as, advanced flight controls for, a commercial airline, right? At that point, pilots these days, they're at least as well trained as they ever were, right? In fact, there's even more equipment they need to be trained on, right? So they still need that really, really high level of expertise, but we provide a huge number of tools that can actually really help enhance their performance and really make these procedures better.
No, absolutely. And, Greg, I was going to say, we really appreciate you coming on the show, but, before, as we kind of wrap up, is there any other, anything else that we should know about the company? Anything that we haven't touched on yet?
No, I think it's mostly just that, look, we have a really, really cool and unique approach that I think is just going to look, feel, and operate very, very different than all the other types of surgical robots that I've seen out there, where different types of sensors, different actuators, different environment, and really just shooting for these compact robots that can be used in, in this case, very specific anatomy, and we can have different variations to use in different parts of the body using essentially the same platform. To me, it's just really, really exciting that we can start doing, again, being the engineer and me calling it closed loop control, right? We want to be able to use live imaging to make sure you actually watch targets and just hit them every time in the right spot the first time. So. Absolutely.
And Greg, for those, I know that, for those interested, they can go to aimmedicalrobotics.com. Or actually, I'm sorry, I may have misspoke. Is it AiM Medical Robotics or it's AiM? aimmedicalrobotics.com for more. But for any investors that are interested to connect with you, aside from like LinkedIn, what's the best way to reach you? Yeah, honestly, I think LinkedIn is the best way to get me, or on the website. I have all my contact information up on the website, so you can always reach out to me. My email is gfischer, G-F-I-S-C-H-E-R, at aimmedrobotics.com. So feel free to shoot me a message there, jump on LinkedIn, check out the website, and send us a message that way. And yeah, I'd be more than happy to talk to anybody that wants to get involved. Perfect. Awesome. Well, Greg, thank you for coming on the show. So that's been another episode of The State of MedTech. As always, everyone, don't forget, subscribe to the show, give us 5 stars and write a review. We're the #1 show in MedTech for a reason, so be sure to do that. And also subscribe, because we have a lot of episodes that come out that don't get directly promoted. That's the only way you can get notified about it, is if you're subscribed either on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. So with that being said, I'm your host, Omar Khateeb, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you for enjoying another epic episode of The State of MedTech. If you're feeling inspired and love this episode, do us a favor, hit that subscribe button and turn notifications on so you never miss an episode. And be sure to give us 5 stars and write a short review, because that helps more people discover this amazing community of ours. If you're a company who has an executive that you'd like to be on the show, or perhaps you want to sponsor one of the episodes, shoot us an email at hello@khateebandco.com. Take care, and we'll see you next time.